Hi, Rob Browne here, Auburn Undercover, along with Ronnie Sanders. Got a special guest, former Auburn coach Terry Bowden, and talking to him before we came on the air. This is going to be a great time. And Coach, just want to say thank you for joining us. Love the color scheme. It looks great. Love the color scheme, Ronnie. So
I still got plenty of orange and blue around this house. That's for sure.
All right, I love seeing that color, Coach. Man, you know we're going to talk a lot, and basically you go back to, I remember December of '92 when you were named the head coach at Auburn, and you left the press conference, and we're in the Christmas parade, and next thing you know, you're recruiting, and you pull 3 of the top 10 kids in the state of Alabama: Jesse McCorvey out of Theodore, Willie Anderson out of Viger, and Marcellus Mostella out of Gadsden. And 3 of the top 10 like that. And then that first 2 years, 21-1, how big that was. How, and your dad would come to the games and just sit out in the stands. You know, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it was a really incredible time. You know, sometimes your most memorable years are those at the final part of your career. But mine came at that point. I was the youngest head coach in the country at Division I at that time, and Auburn was going through some terrible times. The Eric Ramsey thing was winding down. A couple of losing seasons, and 3 years in a row to losing to Alabama. And you said something that I had forgotten. Those 3 recruits were critical. They gave us credibility. Now, we had Rodney Garner, a great recruiter. We had Rick Trickett went down to Mobile, and he don't back down to nobody when it comes to recruiting. If they can understand him, he going to get them. But getting Willie Anderson and that group, and getting Damian Craig, was he that group of the next year?
93. He was in that group.
And the tight end was really probably the biggest recruit made, McCorvey. I mean, he was a very good player. But now Willie was a great player, and Damian Craig was a program changer, and Marcellus had to put some meat on his bones, but he became an outstanding linebacker as well.
He really did. Ronnie?
I mean, talk a little bit about, we talked on the phone earlier. Talk a little bit about those first 2 years and the upsets of Florida.
Well, I mean, that Florida was, again, going into the season, and again, not expectations were that, oh no, we could be entering a very difficult time in the Auburn program. And so there wasn't a lot of high expectations. So we were out there just, I was so young. I was probably naive and not realizing what a huge job I had and what the obstacles were. So that probably played to my part. Played to me in my excitability. But we won our first few games in '93. But until we played Auburn, we hadn't played anybody that was ranked, that was really up there. And Auburn might have been about 4th at that time. I know they were number 1 in the nation. The next year was unbelievable. But they were a team that we weren't supposed to have a chance against. And that was one play. Of course, playing in Auburn made a lot of difference. But that was one of those games where it could have been a blowout. But a play changed the game. They're up 14-0. They're maybe on the 10-yard line right before the half. And I'm working on my halftime talk. What am I going to do? 21 down, 21 zip. The bubbles burst. How do I get our guys to respond? And then I want to say Calvin Jackson intercepted the pass on about the 5 or maybe the goal line and took it the distance. And that crowd was electric, and that whole atmosphere changed. And the sideline, you could just see the hair on the arms of the players stand up. And at that point, we went on to win the game. And at that point, when you came into the dressing room, and you knew that they ended up being, Alabama was the defending national champion and the defending SEC champion, but Florida went on to win the SEC that year. But when we won that game, I said to myself, dang, we can win them all. We got a chance against everybody, because Florida had really was beginning to dominate the 90s in the SEC. Everybody was still running the ball, and they were throwing it over everybody's head. They just Werfel, and of course that year Terry Dean and Werfel, and all the way through the years that Steve Spurrier was kind of turning the SEC on its head. But that game was a real game changer. In '93, and ultimately in the direction of our program.
Yeah, and it was raining that day, and I'll never forget. they were going in kind of like Alabama when they were up 24-0 on Auburn in 2010, and they were going in for the kill, and suddenly Nick Fairley falls on a fumble and kept it alive. And you think about, you had Rodney Allison, Jimbo Fisher. You had come from, now my brother-in-law played at Virginia Tech. They all live in Roanoke, and you came to Birmingham, to Samford, and Jay Barker's mom was your secretary.
She was my secretary. That's right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and when you came to Auburn, it was like, I think the Eric Ramsey nightmare was so bad, and we were reminded of it every day. Talk about how you rallied the team. Remember Mark Murphy and Mark Green and my friends with Inside the Auburn Tigers back then telling me this guy's amazing. And one of my favorite players you ever had out of Dillard, James Bostic.
It was so many people's favorite. We had 5 starters from Dillard High School.
Yeah.
5 of our players' starters were from Dillard. They were state champions 2 years in a row. But maybe the leader of that group, of course, Frank Sanders was one of them. Brian Robinson, the free safety, one of them. But I think Bostic was the quiet leader. Yeah. He was the quiet leader of that group, not as outspoken. I think Frank Sanders is probably more of an outspoken leader of that group. But Bostic was the kind of tailback that Auburn had built their reputation on. 6 foot, 1.5, 6'2", 235, but tough, physically and mentally tough. I think he was a SWAT. He was a part of SWAT down in Fort Lauderdale after he graduated. But a physically tough tailback. Joe Frazier was behind him to give you a different type of look, kind of like that horse and pony backfield from way back with Bo Jackson and the little and
Lionel Little Train James.
Little Train, yeah. But he was the backup. But Bostic was kind of the core of the strength of that team, and I think he made play after play for that football team. And we were a good old-fashioned I formation, tailback-oriented team. And that was still how you won in the SEC. I had to go through that phase where we spread them out and we threw the ball. And we'll talk about Florida 94 because we threw it 51 times that game to win, but Bostic and that tailback and that power at the tailback, because we built our offense around the toss sweep. Back then, you ran a toss sweep, a sprint draw, and a belly play to the fullback. Reed McMillan and Tony Richardson, our 2 fullbacks, were big and physical, and were great blockers as well as inside runners for a strong tailback. Of course, Steve Davis was a backup at that time, and he became a great back. He was a back. That tells you how good Bostic was, and the #1 recruit in the nation. Steve Davis was his backup, and 94, he was a big factor in that game. But anyway, Bostic, what a great player. Frank Sanders, play after play. Stan White, so many players on that team. You can't really. And what's funny is we outscored Florida. They're always the big scoring team, and we won 38-35 that year and outscored them. I think that was one of the most personally satisfying, because we all knew Spurrier was an outstanding play caller. He was the hot coach of the 90s as far as a guy that ran the offense. We outscored them in 93 and 94 because they put up 35 in both of those games. We won, 35 and 33 respectively in both those games, and we outscored them both times.
It was something we'll never forget, I can assure you. Doug Dean's joining us from Birmingham as well.
Coach Bow, Terry, just an honor to talk to you. Looking great, man. That's awesome to see. First of all, on behalf of a bunch of Auburn fans, the whole Auburn family, thank you for some just sensational big games. My late father and I sitting in the south end zone of Jordan-Hare Stadium on that October 16th, 93 game. There wasn't many people, probably besides you, your staff, and that team that was looking for an Auburn win come under the circumstances. But what to me is so, I'll never forget, fourth quarter, there was not a hard rain, there was a drizzle. Do you remember that in that 93 game?
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't like the ball being wet when Etheridge is going to have to line up for a field goal, but he what Pat Dye would call that effeminate
I was wondering if you were going to remember the effeminate Etheridge.
The effeminates and Scott Etheridge. You're not effeminate if you can have the moxie to boot the ball under that kind of pressure. And then what I also remember, I'm bringing these little factoids back because it just adds to the good memories for anybody that bleeds orange and blue. But my father had an invite after Auburn, after y'all sealed that win. And was it Ace Atkins that got a sack late in the game?
Late in the game. It made fun of Sports Illustrated. Remember that? Yeah.
Yep. And great fiction writer later on. There's just some cool things. My dad had an invite up to the Letterman's Club. And you remember October 16th would have also been the third Saturday in October. So Alabama got Tennessee at Legion Field, if memory serves. That's right. And we go up there and Tennessee is leading, and a little kid named David Palmer managed to make a huge play. And I think that game ended in a tie, which pissed us off.
I remember. Because I recruited David Palmer in high school. I went to watch him play in high school. I was at Sanford when he was in high school.
But, I was going to say, and maybe this is a good pitch for you to talk, which is a mandatory segment, Rob and Ronnie, for you to talk about that 94 game. Coach, I have heard, if I've heard one, I've heard 1,000 Auburn fans with high football IQ talk about, and you should own this, and there have been plenty of games that are admirable for offensively for Auburn, but the play calling and game plan in that 94 Auburn upset of Florida in the Swamp, your play calling has been talked about as the most elite and rhythmic and whatever adjectives you want to add play calling in about any Auburn game that any of us can remember. And that's saying a lot because there's a bunch of them. I think Gus Malzahn had a few Rembrandts calling plays, but what people forget from that 94 Florida team, they went on to win the SEC. That was a 10-2-1 Florida team. That's right. That and your dad was part of the story too. Obviously, they tied 31 all regular season with Florida and Florida State.
That was the choke and dope. They were up 34-3 going into the fourth. Oh,
and so then they go on to play for all the marbles, mythical, if you want to call it a mythical national championship, and of course FSU won that one 23-17. So you had that was, to me, the size and impact and meaning of that second in a row win over Florida in the Swamp is even bigger as that season progressed. Take us inside that 94 game if you want to, Coach.
Well, we were, again, we were running a 17-game winning streak. Yep. And going into Florida, you got Spurrier, who's 15-0 against the SEC since he got to Florida. He's the number one scoring offense in the nation. And with a 17-game win streak, we're still 16-point underdogs. And they gave us no chance. And we had won some close ball games coming into that. In fact, if you could define our 93 and 94 teams, it would just be we found a way to win. We would not believe we could lose and won many games just by outplaying people in the fourth quarter as to what we did. Now, I want to mention something a lot of people don't understand. I didn't come to Auburn as a rookie. I came as a 10-year head coach. Yeah. Now, when you're at Salem College and Sanford, that's not the same thing, but you're calling plays the whole time. Yeah. But more importantly, 79 through 82, I was a graduate assistant at Florida State. And my dad was known as the Riverboat Gambler. He was the play caller of the 80s. He was unbelievable. And I was his self-scout coach. I did nothing but study every play he called, every game, and I broke down his tendencies for him. And we stayed up all night till 1 or 2 o'clock on Friday nights. And he would say, Terry, what am I going to do here? I said, Dad, be careful. You do that every time over there. That left hash, be careful. That's where you run the reverse and all those things. And so in those 4 years, I was able to learn from one of the best in the business. And so when I got to little old Salem College and coached the offense in Sanford and coached the offense, I had run the same offense for 9 years. I had called every play with nobody watching. So when you make a mistake, nobody sees. Yeah. So by the time I got to Auburn, I was as comfortable with the offense as any coach could be when I got there. You know what? And I've said this before. Play call, and I'm not going to pat myself in the back, but not everybody can call plays. It's just like chess. Some people can move the pieces, some people can't.
His thinking three plays ahead, isn't it, Coach?
What's that?
His thinking 3 plays.
Well, 2 or 3 plays ahead. That's why 2 people can't play one side of the chessboard, and that's when all the pieces are the same. Now you give one team all pawns and the rest of them kings and queens, and then you call the plays. You got a whole different deal. But don't let a coach kid you. You can screw it up by being the play caller. And so I tried to stay with it as long as I could, just like my father did, and Steve Spurrier. But 94 going into the swamp. Now, Spurrier, again, let me go forth. He lost 5 out of 6 games during that time as a head coach. Lost 6 games in the SEC as a coach at Florida. 5 of them were to my dad or myself. And he didn't like us too much, Yeah. But I was very fortunate. Now, you got to remember, when I'm on the sideline calling plays, I can, on the headsets in the box were Tommy Bowden and Jimbo Fisher. They knew a little bit about it. And on the headsets down the sideline from me was Rick Trickett. So on every play, and I may have called every play, but we had that system down so well that it could be 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 5. I'd say, Tommy, what do you like? Jimbo, what do you like? Instantly, they'd call a play. Rick, what do you like? And he would have a running play. And in that amount of time, I could make my choice between, it's like having 3 doctors' opinions. I got opinion 1, opinion 2. Now I'll stay with my call. And that's how you kind of work it. But you got to have one play caller to tie it all together. So to give people a little background into how that works, I think Gus Malzahn would tell you the same thing, or guys that cut their teeth calling plays. You've got to have a good, got an understanding of your offense. But anyway, we were getting pretty good at it by the time we got to Florida. Now, we were an I formation team, but people say, well, can you run the ball and pass the ball? My dad would say, Terry, if they play 11 people on the line of scrimmage, I'm going to throw it every down until they stop. So I'm a passing coach. And if they play everybody back in zone coverage, I'm going to run the ball till they come close. That day, I'm a running coach. Now, at the end of the season, you'd like to be 50-50, or by the 4th quarter, you would like to even it up. But against Florida, we weren't going to line up against that team, number 1 in the country, and run it every time. So we had 51 passes. But Steve Davis, that game, I want to say 113, 115 yards that game. So he ran the ball pretty good, too.
And the use of the timing of going to the tight end was brilliant.
That was, well, you know what? I didn't plan it that way. We had Andy Fuller was our tight end, and he had a good back. What was the backup? A little thinner, but he was a pretty good backup too. But Andy Fuller from Huntsville was our main tight end. But we had hardly thrown to him the first 4 games. It just, they were covering. It wasn't a play. But I noticed that their defensive coordinator, John Pruitt, who went on to Marshall, won some championships.
Yeah.
His linebackers were zone droppers. On the snap of the ball, if you showed pass, they ran to the hook zones. I mean, they turned their heads and ran. And it was consistent. And so Andy Fuller would just go 5 yards over the center, turn around, and we'd hit him over and over. And they were creatures of habit. Their linebackers could not change. They could have gone to man coverage, I guess, but they didn't. And we hit Andy Fuller all day long, and that was probably the play that everybody. I mean, that play. I mean, Frank Sanders made big catches. Willie Gaucher caught a 4th down on the sideline. That unbelievable, keep his foot in bounds play. But that was a huge play. Andy Fuller was huge. Us looking at their tendencies and deciding that was something that was going to be there throughout the game.
Yeah,
unbelievable,
Coach. This is something my dad did of that game. If you can see it, of the catch, I need to get you a copy of it. I'll get your address, but he did that of Frank Sanders catching the ball, and I wish we could put it up on the screen. But I think about something, how Frank Sanders ended up at Auburn from Dillard. His mother had terminal illness and told Coach Dye when he was down there, I probably won't be around when he gets to Auburn, but I want him to go there. And what an incredible story, and some of the strongest hands ever. You mentioned Willie Gaucher out of Choctawhatchee High School, Fort Walton. Tyrone Goodson out of Brooksville, Florida. And Andy Fuller from, I think, Huntsville High School. 7 catches, 126 yards. Tell you, a friend of mine, Joe Passantino, who's a big fan of yours from Pelham, went to John Carroll in Birmingham, was watching the game, a bunch of us Auburn people, and we had made a bet. I said, Auburn's going to win this game. We bet a case of Red Bull beer on it. He got so excited when Frank Sanders made that catch. He threw his 6-month-old son, Joseph, up in the air.
Yeah.
And thank God he landed safely and got his degree in building science from Auburn. But that game, I was so excited. We were supposed to go to Pickwick Lake. I got so excited and a little bit celebrating too much. We could not go and ended up canceling the trip. But I said, it's worth it if you can beat the number one team on the road. Doug, the question you asked him, I've never heard any response like that from a coach.
Oh,
that's incredible.
I want to take Coach. I want to take you inside one more dynamic. Every great play caller copes with this, and you can apply it if you don't mind to coach what I consider a step, a growth step that maybe Coach Freeze in one or two games that are likely this season might consider. I feel silly questioning a great play caller like Coach Freeze or you, or much less Spurrier. As you said, he was probably arguably the play caller of the 90s. Your dad was in the 80s. You certainly had your moments early 90s. But, it seems to me late in that game in the swamp, Coach Spurrier, for all of his greatness, which is beyond reproach, he couldn't help himself. I think he was a little irritated that his passing game didn't come up even bigger. And he just had to call that deep shot that Werfel threw and Brian Robinson picked up. Do play callers deal with that personally, psychologically? Does ego get in the way of play calling? I mean, talk about that.
Well, your strength is also your weakness, and Spurrier's ego or his ability to call a great game was his strength. But he was ticked off. He was pissed off because he wasn't winning big enough. He's not winning big enough.
That's what I read. He's
got the game won. He's got it won. Just run the clock out. And he throws a post over the middle where, Werfel, they had a pattern where the inside receiver, the slot receiver, would run vertical for 10. And based on where the safety was in cover 2, he'd run the post or the flag. And he read flag and broke for a flag, and the quarterback read post and threw the post to Brian Robinson late in the game over. And Brian's he could have fair caught the ball, Yeah. And and of course we drive down last 55 seconds, we drive and win the game. But I really feel that, and of course I was an admirer of Steve Spurrier, and I love his play calling. I felt like his players believed so much that he was the best caller. They ran him better because they thought he was calling them better. Yeah. But it was his desire. He wanted to beat you bad. He just loved to win. I wouldn't want to play golf against him. I wouldn't want to play. He going to want to beat you bad in whatever he did. But that cost him that game, and because he pretty much had that one won.
The play of that drive, underrated, except to Coach Bowden, 4th and 10.
Yeah.
Thomas Bailey. That was a nerve-wracking but clutch play.
Oh.
Yeah, Thomas Bailey. We mentioned Frank Sanders. Thomas Bailey made play after play after play. Now, maybe I'm wrong. There was a big completion on the sideline to Willie Gaucher, but that wasn't the 4th and 10, was it?
I think it came right after that 4th.
Right, because Bailey caught the comeback on the sideline.
Yep.
The little hook
that little foot drag to Gaucher was.
Yeah.
Oh, well. And we'll hit the Bailey thing, but let me tell you about the foot drag. My brother Tommy, who was a great receiver coach and played receiver in college, he taught the players that when they ran the flag route, the sideline flag pattern, that when you got close to the sideline, you didn't necessarily focus on raising your knee. You focus on putting your other foot in the ground. And no, you didn't focus on putting your foot in the ground. You focused on raising your knee as high as you could because that forced you to put the other foot in the ground. And when you see a picture of a freshman like Willie Gaucher catching a flag pattern in the most critical game of maybe one of the Auburn history, you see his knee hitting about his chest. He lifts that knee, and that forces his foot down about 3 or 4 inches inside the sideline for a huge catch. But Tommy, you say, see, look at that, like cattle. I teach them when I teach them. They follow what I say.
Terry, we get to have hypotheticals. By the way, we all are deep, especially Birmingham people, deep admirer of Bobby Bowden's.
Right.
What an impact. But Auburn plays Florida State hypothetically 94. How would that game have gone?
Well, and I tell people this because can you imagine? Just to tell people how you can be humbled. I was the youngest coach in the country, the first coach to go undefeated in his first year in Division I, Auburn's first 11-0 season, consensus National Coach of the Year. and my dad goes out and wins the national championship. I'm not even the best. I'm not even the best coach in my own
In your
family.
family.
In my best year ever, I'm second best in my own family. But now, what was the question? I got caught
Well,
up in
just
that.
if hypothetically, if Auburn had faced
Well,
that Florida
here's
State
what I
team,
would tell you. Hypothetically, could we beat Florida? Could we beat the defending national champion Alabama? They would. Yes, we could beat Florida State. They were a better football team talent wise. So was Florida,
y'all
and
were
I'll
on
bet
fire
you
though.
player for player Alabama might have been.
Y'all
But
were
that
just
team
on fire.
had chemistry. That team had chemistry, and believed they could win. And once we beat Florida in '93, and we started finding ways to win, then it's just I mean, if you can remember, the first time we didn't win was a tie against Georgia.
Yeah.
But people don't remember. We drove down for the winning field goal, and it was a chip shot. It wasn't a hard shot. It was we had, of course, Etheridge had graduated. I want to say that was the next kicker, but it was on. I don't want to say it's a 23-yard line. So it might have been a 40 or 38-yard. It wasn't a long field goal, but I'll never forget because you have to watch the kickers kick in practice over and over again. We lined up to win the game like we had done 20 straight times, and I looked down the sideline at Trickett. Trickett looked back at me, and he shook his head, not up and down, but sideways, because we knew. And son of a gun, he missed that ball for the first time. We didn't win. But the point I was trying to make, we always felt we were going to win.
Yeah.
And the kids played with such confidence. And, I kind of compare that to golf. It's a confidence game. When you swing the ball or swing the golf club, there's just a confidence that you have that you're going to do it right. And those kids, we sure had that feel going.
Ronnie,
Talk a little bit about the interception game.
Oh, now that's if you watch ESPN Classic, of all the universities in the country, the Auburn LSU game, and I want to say 94.
Yes,
that was a 94. That was now. That's interesting how this thing goes because was that the week before Florida or a couple of weeks before?
There was Mississippi State after that LSU game.
Okay, but LSU, we're playing LSU at home. And I'm calling the plays exactly like I called them against Florida. Different game plan. I couldn't get a first down. We couldn't get a first down. I couldn't call a good play. And I'm just looking at my notes, and we're trying, and we're down. We got 3 points. It's about the only offensive points we can score. But then Howard. What was the name of that quarter? I forget.
Jamie Howard. Yeah.
Who was it?
Jamie Howard.
Jamie Howard. He throws it inside cut. We intercept it, run it for a touchdown. We throw an inside cut, we intercept it, run it for a touchdown. He throws over the middle, we intercept, run it for a touchdown. They fumble into the end zone, and we recover it for a touchdown. We got 31 points to their 28, and we haven't scored an offensive touchdown yet. We got one field goal, 28 points off turnovers, and win 31-28. Alvin from Demopolis or over there towards Demopolis.
Yeah.
And he had a couple. He had one. Well, there's everybody got. Was that Chris Schilling? We had we got a bunch of them, but that was the
Fred
difference.
Smith scored one.
Yeah, that
Brian
was
Robinson.
Brian got one there. I mean, that was it was a crazy game. But if you watch ESPN Classic, I remember Tommy saying, "Terry, you don't think they're going to throw the ball again?" All they had to do was run the football, but
Curly
sometimes
Hallman, please.
Well, Curly, that was probably, and Curly, that unfortunately, I don't think he ever recovered from that. He wasn't calling plays to Amity. I forget who the offensive coordinator was.
Amity.
Amity was the coordinator, but that was just that was
one
of those deals where why in the world that was in. Sometimes you do a game plan, and after the first series, the defense decided they would do something different, and so you don't use the game plan. You do something else. But that's the only thing I have a gripe with coaches who follow the script for the first 10 or 15 plays. If their defensive coordinators had a different game plan all week, and you need to get rid of that script and go with what they're giving you.
Terry, if you look up, and I have the next game I coach will be my first, so who am I to second guess even Curly Hallman? But
yeah,
if you look up coaching malpractice in the dictionary, it's got to have a picture of that LSU offensive play calling.
And unfortunately, even if you're a head coach who doesn't call plays, you're held accountable. And that one was one where I said, "What in the world?" were they thinking? And it was we had some crazy games against LSU. Now we had the fire game. Remember when the old gymnasium caught on fire?
I was there.
I couldn't believe that. I'm thinking they're going to run everybody out of the stadium. But that was a fire game. I think we lost that one.
My dad was a structural engineer, and we were at the game, and we were on the press box side, but looking over there, depth perception, we couldn't tell how close the flames were to that.
No, we couldn't.
I mean, I said, Dad, how strong is that concrete and rebar? He said, if it gets hot enough, it could be a real tragedy, but luckily,
we're very fortunate. I'm not sure in today's world with all the terrorism and stuff, we wouldn't have had a panic in today's world. But back then,
really,
I don't know that we even had all those things come up in our heads. The possibilities there. But
Terry, I bet you've heard this great Bobby. By the way, is it just me, guys, or Terry really sounds like Bobby Bowden, a young Bobby Bowden? That's really kind of special to hear, because I've met Bobby many times, and it was just always a treat to hear him speak. But my favorite, as his career was in its twilight, and he wasn't winning as many games at FSU as he would have liked, and the Noles fans and the post-game pressers would let him know. And they got to where they liked to ask him, have you thought about retiring? And I'm sure you've heard this, Terry. He said, I'm tired of that question, because what you got to understand is after you retire, there's only one more big event.
There's only one more big event in life, and I'm not looking forward to it. And he would say, he would say, boy, when I got to FSU, y'all were calling me sweet old Bobby, sweet old Bobby. And those last couple of years, all you did was abbreviate,
Listen, the fans lose perspective. That FSU was a young, embryonic program in the scheme of things, weren't they?
Yeah, they were women's college till 50. They were about to drop the program in 73 and 4. They went 0-11, 1-10, and maybe 2-10, 2-9, and they were going to drop it. But Florida was the right place to be at the right time. Population, the integration. It wasn't just a bunch of white kids from the beach. It was integrating athletes of all types of athletes, students from around Florida, and he was there at the right time. I remember he had beaten LSU we had to play LSU 4 straight years. I was a GA at Florida State, and we had to play him 4 straight years at LSU, and we won first three, and they offered him the job. Charlie Mack was finishing up, and we beat him. He said, if I can beat LSU at home while I'm at Florida State, there's no reason for me to leave and go there, But it was just one of those things. But and I'll say this about play calling, and that's something Dad told me. If you're just a temporary head coach that doesn't last very long, you can run the same thing. But if you coach in different decades, you better be on the front end of a curve and not the back. I mean, I've always admired even Bear Bryant when he was in the 60s. He won more games than anybody, but he had 2 bad years, and he went from a pro offense to a wishbone. And because he'd had 2 bad years, or like 6-5, and right in the middle of his greatest decade, he goes out and wins even more in the 70s. And my dad won a ton of games, but in the 80s, and in the 90s, he went and switched to a 4 wide out, no huddle Charlie Ward offense, and won even more. But he would say, if you're going to call plays and you're going to last more than 1 decade, you better be on the front end of a curve, because if you were the first guy to put the wishbone in, you won a championship. And if you're the last guy to take it out, you got fired.
Saban did that, Terry, in a different way. He was the first critic. It was player safety problem to run this hurry up, no huddle. Yeah. All of a sudden, Saban started playing pretty fast, and it was just fine for player safety.
Yeah. Oh, no, exactly. And again, he focused so much on defense, but Saban, you got to give him credit. He was, hey, I was at West Virginia. My dad was the offensive coordinator. I was in the stands when Saban was playing in high school, because my dad was recruiting him and 2 other players at their high school. I got to watch him play at Monongah High School back when he was in high school. Of course, he was only 5'7" or 8. And my dad really recruited his tailback, but you had to go through the quarterback to get to the tailback.
Terry, I'll bring you into modern times. Yeah, we love your knowledge of offensive football, and I'm sure you know defense too. But I'm curious, and apply this if you want to the what Hugh Freeze is likely to face this year. Great, highly touted wide receiver room coming into this season. You got to see them play with bullets flying, but there's reason to be optimistic if you're an Auburn fan. But it seems to me that with this RPO fad, and it's not a fad, it works. If you've got a quarterback that has the composure to read at pre-snap and all, and get into the right play. But defensive coordinators, and Auburn will face Dave Aranda. I know he's head coach, but he'll be putting the defensive plan together for Baylor on a Friday night. He can bluff Hugh Freeze and likely starter Jackson Arnold into seeing one thing when he's really going to run a different defense. So is he going to bring the blitz heavy to try to get to the quarterback and nullify these great wide receivers? Or when is he going to drop somebody into coverage? Sure. How would you be running an RPO now, or dealing with what defenses do, trying to bluff you, show you one look, and that's really not what they're going to run? Educate us.
Well, when you go fast, there's not much time to bluff, because if you snap the ball and they're not in position, you've got your advantage on offense. So by running fast, and every now and then, not running fast every play, but having the ability to run every play fast, defense got to get lined up. They got to show you what they're going to do too. That's part of why you run the ball fast, is to keep them lined up in a steady defense. But I'll say this. The one thing is, I would say, when I had a great defense, when we played Alabama, whose defense was always very good, or Tennessee or Florida, back when I was back in the 90s, I was going to have a good quick game to start with. I was going to have the ball, going to run a slant or a speed out or a quick takeoff, something where I could get the ball out of the quarterback's hands till I could see what they were going to run. And there are certain routes, whether it be hitches or speed outs or slants, that are good versus zone and man, but they also give the offensive line and the offensive coaches a chance to see what the plan's going to be. And as you add that to being fast, but I would say this: the other thing is, make sure you've got a full protection formations where you can get your best receiver one-on-one. Because the great thing about a receiver, as opposed to a tailback's got to run through 10 guys or 11 guys. Receiver, quite often, if you set the formation up, if you could put trips to the field and run the inside two guys across the field, that's a one-on-one. And you can take a great receiver, think of Tyreek Hill, take a great receiver and then put him one-on-one. If they don't have a great player on him, you're going to win a lot of battles. So that's why when you got a room full of receivers, find your best one and make sure you can also get him one-on-one, because that's the biggest mismatch there is in football, is a great receiver that you can force the defense to line up one-on-one. And if they put that many people that wide, you can run the football.
Follow-up question. Is there such a thing still? I think there is, but not every game, but certain really hotly contested games that go 4 quarters, that the challenge for an offensive coordinator, a head coach, is to be willing in some games to win ugly, to grind it 3.5, 4 yards a time, because that you can't deal with their edge rusher. You want to throw the ball, they're showing you a look where you should be throwing it, but you just can't. Is there such a thing as setting your ego aside and winning ugly, Terry?
That to me, scoring a lot of points is when you're trying to get a job. Scoring a lot of points every game is when you're a coordinator that's still wanting to be a head coach, or you're a head coach wanting to move to a higher field, higher team. But when you get to where you want to be, and when I got to Auburn, I was a little bit naive, because I flew to alumni club meeting with Shug Jordan's wife. His widow was on the plane with him, and she said, Coach Terry, be sure to plant a pecan tree in your front yard so Auburn people know you're going to stay. and I took her to heart when that one happened. But I think and now I've forgotten the question. I get up on a tangent, but you were asking about
winning.
Yeah, you put your ego aside when your defense, when they've got a great offense and your defense has struggled, or you can see after the game begins, the flow of the game, that the defense doesn't need to be on the field. Slow it down, run more plays. Now I will say this. You slow it down too much and you take 6 or 7 minutes off the clock, and you miss a field goal, then you've just let a lousy team be in the game to the second quarter. So all that stuff fits in, but you can't. I mean, every game is different.
That's
and
right.
you've got to play it. Now, if your team is good at one thing as opposed to another, you're eventually going to to go with what you do well. And coaches and you got to remember this. And another thing my dad taught me, well, he has a tendency to do this. He has strong tendencies. The only time you don't have tendencies is when you're no good. If you're good, you have a tendency to run behind that right tackle.
Yeah.
You have a tendency to do this. The key is to know your tendencies. Is to know that every third down the first 3 games you did this. Then when you play Alabama or you play a biggie, right there where you always do this, then do that. Do something different. And now you've used your tendencies to hurt the defense. But I think what you've got to do is throw your ego out. Too many coaches, I think, and I can name a few. You can watch them. I mean, and I think they get caught up with scoring a lot. I mean, Riley at Oklahoma and then at USC. And I think he's a great guy. I remember when he was a young GA at Texas Tech, I'd go out there and study their offense. I think he was a GAT. He might have been a receiver coach, but I think he got in the habit of scoring a lot of points as he was trained to do by Mike Leach. But when he got to the halves, the Oakland, he wouldn't get. It was defense is the name of the championship. Still, it's defense, and I think at USC he's finding out all that scoring a lot of points. When you play a great team, you don't score that many points. I don't care how good you are at scoring points. When you play a great defense, your point total is going to come down.
Terry, looking at right now, a lot of schools say we're going to go stack up the tight ends. And Brendan Martin, my executive producer, talked about these edge rushers that you see like in the SEC. They just kind of erase these guys. And we think about a Rob Gronkowski and some of these great tight ends, but they're fewer and far between. What about the game? There's always a shelf life for every offense or defense that comes along. I mean, remember Brother Oliver, rest his soul.
Yeah.
In the 97 game against Tennessee, y'all blitzed 10 or 11. That's so unorthodox. But where's the next chapter you think that's going to be written in offense for college football?
You know, I wish I could tell you that. I'm not sure that I know the next chapter. I just think everything it goes in circles. That we evolve back. You know, when we went from an 11 personnel.
Yeah.
When my first 10 years in college football, we didn't play anything but 11 personnel, and every now and then 12. Yeah. But that's it. We never played 10 personnel or 4 wideouts or even 11 personnel. But once it started, then we went almost entirely 10 personnel. Everybody going to get 4 wideouts. And then we're finding out, boy, that tight end can block and catch the pass. And right now we're kind of 11 personnel and a tight end back involved is huge. Yeah. I sit there and say, you know what? I bet you I could get my old 11 personnel. Because I would go to 4 wideouts. I'd take my 11 and never change personnel, but teach my tailback how to run routes out of the slot and teach my tight end how to do a few things out of the slot. And I could do all my plays without giving the defense a change to go with. Because Brother Oliver was one of the best. I used to love getting in the office at 4 o'clock with Brother, God rest his soul. Yep. But he would say, Terry, now look at this formation. Now, when they come out, when it's third down, they got 27 plays they run. But oh my goodness, they have this personnel group. They only run 10 plays out of that formation. Well, there's number 28. When he's in, they only run 4 plays when he's in. And he would have it down to 3 plays. They only run 3 plays by looking at down and distance, formation, personnel, and then which players are in the game. And he would stay up all night, and I would stay up all night studying that stuff. Sometimes I think young coaches now, it got too much to playing fast or studying analytics. And analytics are great if you're looking at an average. But I think you got to play each game one at a time, and you got to study what the other team does. And I think the old school guys, we just don't have a lot of them anymore that understand. You know, I was young and I could do it. I never went to bed on Friday night in '93, not 1 minute, watching the old 16 millimeter film all night long. I mean, all night long. And it was like cramming for an exam and forgetting everything 2 hours after you took the exam. Yeah. But I would have everybody, but that's what we used to study a lot more film, I think, and video instead of dealing with paper and analytics and printouts, a little bit more so that. And Brother, you mentioned Brother, he was one of the best at that.
Yeah.
Terry, talk a little bit about the staffs or the different coaches that you had on. I mean, we had some really good coaches.
Phenomenal.
And how about and also talk about what was it like to have Rick Trickett on the?
Well, I mean, Rick. Let me tell you about Rick. When I was at West Virginia as a player, my dad left West Virginia. Frank Signetti, who was Kirk Signetti's dad, was my head coach. He was my dad's offensive coordinator. And Kurt, I've known Kurt since he was 5 years old. But Rick joined the staff after my dad left, but he was a defensive line coach at West Virginia. But he was a treat. And excuse the language, but his favorite saying was, "I don't want to see nothing but assholes, elbows, raw meat, and gunpowder." That was one of his favorite sayings, and that's him speaking, not me. But Rick he is old. I used to worry that he'd get beat up at practice because he'd almost play. Well, I think probably a couple of times he did, but he would be in their grill so hard. But he reminded me how hard-nosed we had to play. But yeah, we had I mean, look at that. Rodney Garner was not just a great recruiter. He was a GA when I put him on staff as a full-time tight end coach. He's the one that coached those tight ends, and he was, other than being a great recruiter. Then you had Rodney Allison, Tommy Bowden, Jimbo Fisher was my quarterback coach. But defense, a lot of people don't realize Wayne Hall, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. He played for Bear. I retained him as a defensive coordinator. He did a great job there. Joe Witt, defensive ends. And who was God rest his soul. My defensive line coach, Jack Hines, was my secondary coach, and we broke the Auburn record for interceptions a couple years in a row. But that staff was a very good staff. Many of them went on to be head coaches, but they were young and hungry. We were all young and hungry, and it was a great one. Then look at this. Then I picked up Brother Oliver, which was I was probably naive to go after Alabama's defensive coordinator. And then after that, I think the best defensive coach in the name of the game, I hired Pete Jenkins from Mississippi State. Yeah, and he was phenomenal because he's still a legend. And well, we can talk about 93, 94, but he'll tell you 97, my assistant coach did as good a job. Yeah. We did not have the most talented team, but we came one play away from winning the SEC with Peyton Manning and that group up there. My coaches did a great job of giving us a chance to be successful, especially the last 2 weeks, beating out Georgia and Alabama in the last 2 games to get us to the SEC championship.
Terry, I have to add, I complimented you and you earned it. I'm not just sucking up to you because I appreciate all you did for Auburn, but I need to add to your accolades, and it is by far my favorite road trip as an Auburn fan. 1997 Death Valley. Auburn, God Almighty, what a game! I was walking in the stadium, and I had a cute LSU co-ed run up to me like she was an old friend, and she said, "Auburn sucks." I mean, I said, "All right, game on, baby. We're in Baton Rouge." And so that Bill Oliver told me, and I think he's quoted this many times. You probably read it. He said, "If Takeo Spikes is not playing for Auburn in that game, Cecil Collins would have run for 500 yards."
Oh yeah. And,
we had one guy. Your play calling, and that was a back and forth game. Auburn got hot early, which helped. But the play calling, especially second half in that game, was also sensational. And that was one of those games you hope to be the last team that gets the ball offensively. Right.
And we were I think Rusty Williams ran a ISO off the side, scored there in the fourth quarter. But and I'll say this: as a head coach, you want your defense to dominate. But as a head coach, play caller, and you see that we can't stop the other team, boy, you lick your chops. Goody, I get to call it wide open. And when you have that situation, you get to let it loose. You get to call plays you might be too nervous to call if you feel like you've got a strong enough defense. That was just one of those games where the offenses were scoring. And I remember old Hicks Poor, who started out as a walk-on, made some big catches for us there. And he's just average talent-wise, but made plays for us with that bunch. But it was a big, and you got to remember the year that we went there, I want to say 94, 96 maybe, where somebody in the stands blew a whistle. We're on like the 95 yard. We're on the 1 yard line. And I had heard rumors that be careful, somebody up there blows a whistle. Sure enough, somebody blows a whistle as we drop back for a quick 3-step drop. And Pat Nix stops, and all the linemen and the defense and everybody stopped, except the officials never blew a whistle, and they sacked him for a safety, and we ended up losing by about
Yeah.
3 points. But the official said, "Well, we didn't hear. We don't know if there's a whistle, and that's a whistle. I don't
Outrageous.
care what." And you clearly couldn't tell till you watched the video the next day how the players on both teams kind of stopped, and then the defense stepped across like they had been through it before.
That
And,
97, that would have to be near the top, if not at the top, of Damian Craig's performances in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, that was an incredible game for him there, 97. And if you remember, that game was a great win for him. We had a tough loss at Mississippi State at home, but I said, Damien, you're going to win the Heisman. We're going to throw it every down. I got a thought. We got a week off, and we got Georgia and Alabama, and they're pretty good. And he was one of the Heisman candidates, and we threw it about every down. But we turned the ball over 5 times inside the 20 going in and lost 15-0. And it was a terrible loss. But what we had done was prove to the conference we couldn't run the football. So in the week off, I put an entirely different offense in with a wing and 2 tight ends. And we ran and fed Beasley at the one back. And we must have run for 250 yards against Georgia the next week and upset Georgia and then beat Alabama to win the SEC. But Damien was a great quarterback. But the LSU was a huge one for us that year, too.
We're hiring you as an objective, unbiased football analyst for a moment to comment on what any fair person would consider the undisputed most dramatic finish in any sport. And that is obviously the kick 6 game. I know you've seen it on film, but
every coach.
Final, and I don't want to make this about taking down the GOAT Nick Saban. I mean, those things happen in big games, but the final drive, Auburn's down 28-21, and Gus Malzahn dials up every single play call was a handoff to Trey Mason until that RPO third option pass to Sammy Coates. So take it from there, and then the drama of 1 second being added to the clock and the questionable coaching decision. Do you try a field goal there, or is it a Hail Mary call? Talk about what was happening that last few minutes of the game.
Yeah, now I was coaching. I don't know that I watched every play. I just remember the last play and the things that went through every football coach's mind that's running a football program, because how many of us had quit working on covering field goals? Because most of us wouldn't kick it so far that it was in a returnable amount at a point in time where you would have return practiced. And so I don't know that it's a knock on Saban not to be ready for it, because it's almost like when a team's going to down the ball to end the game, the quarterback takes a knee, but instead of taking a knee, he stands up and throws a touchdown pass. Nobody practices that. Nobody defends that. I mean, because nobody does it. Well, I think in football, a lot of us had forgotten that, hey, you can return that because they've got all linemen to protect the kick. How are they going to cover a punt return or kick return? And so when we saw it, it's like everybody in America worked all week the next week. Every head coach never stopped a week without working on covering a field goal. But we were all 1 week late. But the other great call was that Malzahn they had enough gumption knowledge to practice it. Because it doesn't just work because you want it to work. You have to practice it. So what a great example of being prepared for everything, or the kicking game, or the little things, and 2, a reminder that we all better be careful, because it doesn't take but one play that can change a lot of things.
Isn't it crazy? Just when we think we've seen it all, we understand that even coaches, we understand everything there is to know about football. We don't.
No.
Yeah.
No, and that happens. I mean, I don't know if y'all remember. We had a 4 overtime loss to Georgia. I don't know if y'all remember that.
96.
That was Tikio 96. We lost that was the first year you could have overtimes. But I don't know if y'all remember. We're winning the game, and they've got like 17 seconds left, and they've thrown it into the end zone, and they run 4 wide outs in the end zone. It's incomplete. No, the quarterback gets sacked, and they have no timeouts left. So as he falls down, he rolls the ball out into the field Well, one of our players, I want to say Dorsey, our defensive tackle, picked up the ball
Yeah.
and ran it off the field, shaking the ball up in the air. The official stops the clock until they can get the ball back in play. And that gave him one more play to down it, and they threw a touchdown pass on the next last play of the game and then beat us in 4 overtimes. But never can you tell your kid, don't pick up. If it's the last play of the game and you get a sack and he rolls it out in the middle of the field, don't pick it up and run off the field. It's not over until the last second comes off. But that was something I'd never seen, and it cost us a huge loss against Georgia in 4 overtime. We had a winning record against Georgia and Alabama during my time there, but that one we should have won.
and what'll make you pull your hair out, they're probably referees that don't call that.
No, that's exact. That I mean, to me, the referee should have said, you know what, that's crazy. We should not have stopped the clock. It's over. We should not have stopped it. To get another ball sent in, but we should not have stopped it. But they did, and it was a crazy changeup.
That was the Samir Dowdy in the Final Four when he bumped into the UVA player. I mean, but Coach, we got to wrap up. We got to do this again. I mean, this
fantastic.
Doug, Ronnie, just I'm in awe, and I'm going to tell you something.
Yeah,
Terry Bowden, Tony Barnhart comes on our show a lot, and he loved your dad. And when your father passed away in August of 2021, he told a story on the show about the kind of guy your dad was. What a man. He said there had been a writer. It was a big Florida State game. And Terry Bowden, I think one of his grandchildren he lost. And he was talking about that. And one of the writers asked him about, he took the guy's hat, autographed it, and turned around and threw it back to him. I mean, you come from good stock. I remember when you first came to Memphis, Al Sherman and Sid Sherman picked you up at the airport, and they brought you up there. You had on a camel hair blazer, and you said, "Hey, man, I need a cocktail." And they had about 300 people packed in that room.
I remember.
And you lit a fire under our ass. But we got to have you
Terry,
back.
Love to do it. I'll be glad to.
Terry, you just got to come out of your shell, though. You're so shy and unwilling to run your mouth.
Let me one more story. At the Florida game in '94 at halftime, I've already talked to my staff. They're talking to their position coaches. I'm sitting in the coach's room taking notes on what to tell my team before we go back out. There's a phone on the wall. I pick it up. It's got a dial tone. I called my dad's home number. He picks the phone up at halftime. I said, "Dad, how do you like that?" He said, "Whatever you're doing." He said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Keep doing it."
He said, "What the hell are you calling me for at home? Go coach."
I have no idea why I did that. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's epic. This epic beyond imagination. Terry, what an honor to talk to you. You're so entertaining.
Ditto.
Thank you, man.
Love the color combination, by the way.
Thank you, bud. We'll keep this one. I'll keep this one in the closet for you.
All right, we'll do it again. Thanks, everybody, for watching AU Undercover, man. We'll do it again next week. Appreciate everybody watching.
See you guys.
All right, thank you.